In this episode, we're going to explore the different social challenges facing the iPad generation, known as Generation Alpha. I'm also going to share with you the one key to getting through to this generation. And finally, we'll explore the traditional teaching models versus modern methods of teaching. But first, what in the world is Brainrot? I went to the world's foremost authority, which is Reddit, and you know that. But this user, Sakai, said Brainrot is the idea that exposure to certain content can basically turn you into an idiot. Have you heard the term Brainrot? Give me a like if you have, and give me a subscribe if you haven't, because you probably need to hear some of this stuff. But according to McCrindle and Fell in the book that I am reading for some of this research on Generation Alpha, they said Gen Alpha seamlessly integrates technology and screens into their lives, and they can't imagine a world without it. Furthermore, they said Generation Alpha is using tech since before they could talk, and so we have yet to see the full impacts of their interactions with screens, which is why I believe some people say that Generation Alpha is doomed. They consume more and more content online that is just silly and dumb and stupid, and I think that's where some people go ahead and dub it and classify it as brain rot. And so how can we as parents and educators, pastors and teachers who love them, how can we pull them up out of it? Well, to make matters worse, beyond just this brain rot thing, there are some social challenges that Generation Alpha is facing on a regular basis. According to parents, the top 5 things that Generation Alpha is facing is bullying, online bullying through social networks, navigating their own mental well-being, social pressure to be a high achiever, and then the pressure to grow up faster. The list is the same with educators, but it's in a little bit of a different order with a little bit of different percentages. Educators would say the number one thing that Generation Alpha is facing is online bullying through social networks. The pressure to grow up faster, social pressure to be a high achiever, navigating their own mental well-being, and then navigating loneliness and social isolation. Tony George, who's the headmaster at the King's School, says this. He says, never before have we been so connected and yet so lonely at the same time. And so to be human is to be relational, yet social media has now come to amplify the worst of humility, the antisocial. Technology amplifies well-being issues like bullying, and we have to deal with that. Other issues facing Generation Alpha that are social challenges that are things that we just have to be aware of and come to grips with. Up-aging. We talked about up-aging in the last video, which is linked right here when we explored and introduced Generation Alpha for the first time. Another thing that kind of comes to the forefront, especially with education, is just sitting still. This generation is finding it harder and harder to stay still. And so in a traditional classroom setting, how do you manage something like that? You know, in my own context in student ministry, one of the things that I do to sort of overcome the sitting still conundrum is we try to integrate turn and talks, where I'll teach for a little bit and then I'll let them turn and have an opportunity to talk. I use this feature on DYM's Sidekick presentation model that has different poll features so that they can use their phone. They can seamlessly, as we said earlier, seamlessly integrate into the technology that's in front of them. I try to create moments of interaction amongst them, amongst myself as the communicator and the presenter. I try to break up my teaching methods so that I'm not like teaching for like a half an hour straight, but I'll teach for a little bit and then we'll put a break in the middle and do some other stuff and I'll teach a little bit more. We also like to put paper down on the tables that they're sitting at so that they can doodle on it or even just take notes to keep paying attention to what's going on in the room. Other things that they face, online bullying. Children developing with technology is another thing that they face. Like, for example, kids who say, hey, Alexa, play. Like, that's just a normal part of their vernacular. And we don't know what the implications are yet for kids who've been raised with this as a normal fabric and part of their life. I know I installed my very first Alexa when my now 8-year-old, who is in Generation Alpha, was a baby. And so he's only ever had an Alexa device in his house. And YouTube is becoming the preferred source and piece of entertainment with Generation Alpha, with people like PewDiePie, Dude Perfect, Mr. Beast, Ryan's World, and The Odd is out. And finally, how do we keep these kids safe? Parents especially are concerned about safety of Generation Alpha, especially with the rise of shows like Murder Next Door. And so how do we keep our children and Generation Alpha safe? Well, I'm glad that you asked. Because I now do think that with those social challenges sort of in view, how do we, with those social challenges, with the idea of brain rot, what is the key to getting through to this generation? Let's check it out. One of the keys I believe to getting through to Generation Alpha is to be an active listener. Once again, from the book Generation Alpha by McCrindle and Phil, they give kind of 5 steps to active listening. And I wanted to share them with you because I thought that they're fantastic. Because we all, though Generation Alpha was grown up with cell phones and technology, we all are victims to the cell phone world, and we all are victims to screens. And so their keys to kind of this active listening is, number 1, to squarely face the listener. When you squarely face the listener, you can demonstrate full attention and interest. Number 2, open body language. So put down your screen, uncross your arms, and that indicates and communicates interest and attention. If you lean forward, lean towards them, then that will help give the speaker the idea that you are interested, as opposed to leaning back, which kind of helps demonstrate that you may be less interested in what they have to say. Finally, eye contact. If we're focused on the speaker and we look them squarely in the eye and give them our full attention, that also communicates that they have value and that what they say matters and is interesting. And then finally, give responsive gestures like nods and ahas and other affirming feedback. The speaker will share more as we as the listener display our empathy and our ability to engage with them. Now, here's the thing. You all know that. You've all heard that. That's just a key to active listening. But with screens as a hurdle in a lot of our lives, we need to practice putting those things down and practice active listening with Generation Alpha. And I believe that we will help them get off of their devices if we can show them and share with them a way to interact as human beings. 2018, the National Institute of Health reported that children who spend more than 2 hours on screens demonstrated lower language and thinking skills. And so it's important that we all help model for Generation Alpha, who's grown up with screens, who's only ever known it, model for them what it's like to have healthy relationship with other human beings, and also how to get away from screens and really experience and unlock the fullness of life. So if we're teachers, pastors, educators, I'm a youth pastor, like how do we teach Generation Alpha? More than 4 in 5, about 83% or more, and 7 in 10, about 71% of educators believe that schools today are doing much better at engaging students with their varied different learning styles. But students today are experiencing a teacher-facilitated, interactive, learning-centric environment, and classroom layouts are now designed to help sort of reflect this. And so what are some of the keys and the differences between traditional teaching models and more classic and now new like learning styles? It's kind of like the difference between self-directed and some of the individualized styles of learning. And so in like a traditional classroom setting, you may be more verbal and just talk more. But I think a more modern style of learning for Generation Alpha is they're more visual. So how can you bring about visual aid? How can you bring about object lessons and things that are going to allow them to see it with their eyes and let it come to life in a little bit of a different way? Traditional models might be, hey, sit and be quiet and listen. But now more modern methods of learning are try it and see. And, I think that's a challenge for a lot of us in churches and in student ministry, because how do we help kids try and see what is there in the Bible? Last week I tried something. It was an experiment. I don't even know if I liked it yet or not, but I had students look up verses to help me describe the character of God. And then when they looked them up, they told them to me. And from the stage and from the platform, I had my TV or my computer airplaying BibleGateway.com, and I would look the verse up live time, and then it would show on the screen, and then everyone could read it together. That was just an example of me trying to let them kind of try to look up in the Bible for themselves and then see what they looked up and kind of add to the teaching method. Other traditional methods of learning might be an authoritarian method of learning with the teacher who's in charge and who's the boss. But now more modern methods of learning are participatory, right? Letting Generation Alpha actually participate in their learning and in the teaching style. Traditional models might be more curriculum-centered, where now they're more learner-centric and trying to get through to them and give them what they need in order to learn. Traditional might be more closed book exams, but we live in an open book world, right? You're never going to be faced to in a situation where you don't have access to find the answer to something, especially with a cell phone in your pocket. So how do we, as educators, as teachers, as pastors, how do we navigate that for Generation Alpha in a way that makes sense? Traditional would be books and paper, but now we have glass and we have devices, we have cell phones, we have ways to look things up. Traditional would be theoretical thinking, but now there's more practical skills that need to be taught and conveyed and given to the next generation. As we said in the last episode, that several of the jobs that they're going to be taking are going to be different than jobs that even exist now. And finally, direct instruction versus inquiry-based learning. So with all of this different kind of conflicting information, what do you think our approach to education as pastors and educators should be with Generation Alpha? What, even furthermore, should our approach with cell phones be? Should we embrace them and find a way to let Generation Alpha use them, or should we push them away because they disrupt the traditional ways of teaching and educating? How do we navigate that as youth pastors? How do we navigate that as parents? What do you do if you have a Generation Alpha kid? Do you lean into a phone? Do you embrace it, or do you hold off giving it to them? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I want to explore that in the very next episode, which is linked right here on screen. So feel free to tap that, and I would love to talk to you even more about my findings in that. Don't forget that we are making digital discipleship easy, possible, and accessible. So as always, stay hybrid.